Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to Generative AI Futures. Today we are diving into a really important topic.
It's a huge one.
For the last few years, the biggest headline in AI was, parameter count, who had the biggest model.
Right. The bigger, the better.
But now it feels like the entire battleground has shifted to one critical metric, the LLM context window.
It absolutely has. And this isn't just about memory. It's the model's effective cognitive workspace.
That's a great way to put it.
It really is. I mean, we're discussing the difference between an LLM that can hold a simple conversation and one that can actually perform complex, multi-step reasoning over, say, an entire corporate code base.
More years of meeting transcripts, just massive unstructured data.
Exactly. And expanding this cognitive workspace is it's really the prerequisite for two massive breakthroughs that we're starting to see.
So the first one being many-shot learning. We're moving beyond just the few examples we typically give models.
Precisely. When you only have 5 or 10 examples, the model's pretty limited in what patterns it can infer. But with context windows stretching into the hundreds of thousands of tokens.
You can give it hundreds of examples.
Hundreds, even thousands. And that's many-shot learning. It allows the model to infer these really complex, high-dimensional patterns that lead to just a huge leap in performance, far beyond what just scaling up parameters could ever get you.
And the second breakthrough, which seems crucial for the future of autonomous AI agents, is solving what you call the agentic state bottleneck.
Yeah.
So how does a massive context window fix this problem of an agent just forgetting what it did a few steps ago?
Well, an autonomous agent operates in a loop, right? It's observation, then thought, then action.
Okay.
Every single one of those steps generates tokens. So if you have a complex debugging task that takes, say, 50 steps, the accumulated history could easily hit 100,000 tokens.
Right. And if your context window is too small?
It has to truncate. It has to chop off the oldest steps. So it literally forgets why it started, it forgets its previous mistakes, and it often gets stuck in these really repetitive, costly loops.
So state consistency is the key. If you can hold the entire history of the task in working memory, the agent can do what some researchers call meta-reflection. It can see everything it's done.
That's the goal. That's the imperative. But here's the massive problem that frustrated engineers for years, even when they could build physically larger context windows.
And what's that?
The phenomenon of context rot.
Context rot. That sounds like a digital disease. What is it?
It's the observation that, even if you theoretically give a frontier model a massive window, the quality and the accuracy of its output just degrade. They fall off a cliff as the context gets longer.
Especially for tough reasoning tasks.
Especially then. It's proof that just having the capacity doesn't automatically equal having the capability. And to understand why that happens, we have to start with the fundamental mathematical hurdle that really governed AI for years.
The notorious quadratic wall. What's the sort of physical law behind this limit?
It all comes from the heart of the transformer architecture, the self-attention mechanism.
Right.
Specifically, it's the operation that calculates how much every token relates to every other token. The math involves this QKT matrix multiplication.
Query key transpose.
Yep. And if you have an input sequence of length, none dollars, this operation has to generate a none dollar times number attention matrix.
So every token has to look at every other token to build those relationships, which means if $1 the number of tokens doubles, the computational and memory cost quadruples, it's n squared.
That's it. That ONLR scaling is the quadratic wall. For years, this meant context windows were basically capped around 4,000 tokens. But the computation time, the FLOPs, that's only half the battle.
The memory is the real killer.
The memory is the true killer.
Can you give us a sense of the scale here, just to make the engineering challenge feel a bit more tangible?
Sure. Let's just focus on the memory needed to store that none dollars number, another attention matrix, and the KV cache. At 4,000 tokens, you need about 32 megabytes of VRAM.
Trivial.
Trivial, like we said. Now, let's jump to 100,000 tokens. That's going to require roughly 20 gigabytes of VRAM.
Okay, that's already eating up most of the memory on a high-end consumer GPU.
Precisely. And if you try to push it to the scale you need for, say, reasoning over an entire data set, let's say 1 million tokens.
What are we looking at?
You hit a requirement of 2 terabytes of memory.
Wow.
That's physically impossible for a single device, even a cutting-edge server.
So the history of context expansion has really been about one thing. How do you avoid materializing that full, gigantic attention matrix in memory?
That's the whole game. But even when clever engineers could stretch the limits, maybe to 256,000 tokens, They ran straight into that cognitive failure mode, the lost in the middle problem.
Walk us through that. It's so counterintuitive that a model with a perfect memory just doesn't use the middle part of its input.
It is strange. When you test these models on retrieval tasks, you consistently see this U-shaped performance curve. They do exceptionally well on information that's presented at the very beginning of the context.
That's the primacy bias.
Right. And they also do really well on information that you place right at the end. That's the recency bias.
But the big chunk in the middle.
The large middle segment, maybe 50 to 70% of the document, is effectively ignored. The signal just decays, the information gets lost, and you get context rot.
So we had to fix two things at once. The hardware limit, the quadratic wall, and the model's ability to actually reason over that length, the cognitive limit.
Exactly. And this dual challenge led to the architectural and algorithmic victories we've seen so recently.
The first big fix had to deal with the model's sense of sequence geometry, right? Positional information.
Yes. Early methods they'd crash when they saw sequences longer than what they were trained on.
The extrapolation crash. So how did they teach a model to generalize beyond its training length?
With rotary position embedding, or ROPE. ROPE was brilliant because it sidestepped the absolute position problem. It doesn't give a token a fixed address. It only cares about the relative distance between tokens.
Okay.
The concept of distance, $1, stays constant whether you're at token 100 or 1,000,000 tokens deep. So the model can, in theory, extrapolate indefinitely.
That fixed the crashing, but it didn't totally solve the distance decay problem, did it? I mean, tracking relationships over millions of tokens is still really noisy.
It's still a huge challenge. And this is where innovations like Llama 4 Scout's interleaved rope, or iRope, come in. To get to that massive 10 million token window, iRope had to balance two competing needs.
What were they?
They interleave standard rope layers, which are great for local syntax for understanding the immediate context, with layers that have no positional encoding, no PE.
Layers with no positional encoding. So for some steps, they're intentionally turning off that awareness.
They are. The no PE layers treat the context as if it's just a bag of words. It's permutation invariant. This allows the model to aggregate global semantic information based purely on content, bypassing the distance decay penalties that plague standard rope at extreme lengths.
So it's balancing local attention with a kind of global, big picture comprehension.
That's a perfect way to describe it. It's a massive architectural win. But even with iRope, you still have to defeat that physical memory wall, which brings us to the I/O-aware algorithms.
Right, because the bottleneck shifted from raw compute power, FLOPS, to just the speed of moving data around.
We moved from a FLOPS bottleneck to an I/O, or memory bandwidth bottleneck. Specifically, the traffic jam caused by writing these huge intermediate matrices to the relatively slow high bandwidth memory, the HBM.
So tell us about Flash Tension 3. How does that beat the HBM traffic jam?
It uses a very clever technique called tiling. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
The massive HBM is like your industrial-sized kitchen counter-huge capacity, but slow to get to. The SRAM is a tiny, fast cutting board right next to you.
Great analogy.
Standard Attention tries to do all its work on that slow counter. Flash Attention 3, which is tailored for hardware like the H100, loads small blocks of query, key, and value vectors onto that fast local SRAM cutting board.
And does the work there.
It performs the attention computation for that block locally, accumulates the result, and then only writes the final output back to the slow HBM.
So it's treating a huge amount of slow memory traffic for a bit more computation on the fast on-chip cache. That's a fundamental engineering pivot.
It is. But even Flash Attention can't solve the problem if your key value cache itself is too big for a single GPU.
Right.
The KV cache for 10 million tokens can be over 80 gigabytes, often more. And this is where ring attention comes in.
How does ring attention let us scale context linearly with the number of devices?
Okay, imagine you have 10 GPUs connected in a circle, a ring topology. Instead of one GPU holding all 10 million tokens, the context is sharded. Each GPU holds 1 million tokens.
But how does GPU 1 see the data on GPU 10?
That's the trick. The key and value blocks are passed sequentially around the ring. Each GPU processes its local batch, then passes its context block to the next device in the ring.
Like a bucket brigade.
It's exactly like a bucket brigade. This continues until every GPU has sequentially seen and computed attention over the entire context set, even though it only ever stores a small piece of it.
Okay, so we've covered the math problem, the architectural fixes like iRope, and now the hardware solutions like Flash Attention and Ring Attention. These all get us to physically huge context windows.
They do.
But we still have that problem of context rot. Complexity is still an issue.
Yes. Even with 10 million tokens, if the task requires complex analysis like comparing two definitions buried 3 million tokens apart, a model relying just on monolithic attention still struggles. The next solution required a true paradigm shift.
A shift in how the model even treats the input.
A huge shift.
Yeah.
And that is the introduction of recursive language models, or RLMs.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
This is the leap. The key insight of RLMs is that a long prompt should not be seen as static input for the neural network. Instead, it has to be treated as an external environment that the LLM can strategically interact with using code.
That's a massive change in the model's role. It's no longer a passive memory bank. It's an active agent.
Think of the core LLM with its limited context window as a researcher's small notebook. That's your fast, small memory. The full, massive prompt is the vast, slow library.
And to navigate the library, the researcher doesn't memorize it all. They use tools.
They use tools. The RLM is the researcher. The prompt is loaded as a variable, a huge string within a Python REPL environment.
A REPL, a read-evil print loop, it's like an interactive command line for code.
Exactly. The model writes and executes Python code inside this shell. Things like reject searches, splitting the text by chapter, finding specific pattern.
And the recursive part comes from a special function, right?
Yeah.
LLM query.
That's the core mechanism. The main RLM writes code that says, take this huge document variable, chunk it into paragraphs, and then for each paragraph, invoke a sub-LLM call using LLM query to identify the key entities.
So the subcalls are operating on these small, manageable snippets of context.
Precisely. The results of those sub-responses are then returned to the main RLM as variables in the code, and the main model can then programmatically aggregate those variables into a final coherent answer.
This feels fundamentally superior to older attempts like context compaction or summarization.
It is, because RLM isn't lossy. Summarization, as the research says, is rarely expressive enough for dense tasks because you throw away fine details. RLM preserves full fidelity. It's also better than standard RLE because it's not limited by some fixed retrieval heuristic. It can reason holistically over the entire environment.
Let's get to the hard data. When you test RLMs on tasks specifically designed to break traditional LLMs, what happens?
The difference is, it's night and day. Take the BrowseCon Plus benchmark. It's a multi-hop question-answering task over a corpus of 1,000 documents, totaling 6 to 11 million tokens.
A traditional model can't even load that.
The base GPT-5 model fails completely. 0% accuracy. It can't ingest it. But RLM GPT-5 achieves 91.33% accuracy.
It turns an impossible task into a solved problem.
It's an emergent capability. Or look at the Oolong pairs benchmark, which has quadratic complexity because you have to pair up entries across a long list.
A test that attention is fundamentally bad at.
Catastrophically bad. The base GPT-5 gets an F1 score of 0.04%. It completely fails. But the RLM achieves 58.00%. It uses its code execution layer to decompose the quadratic problem into linear subproblems, is performing high-level algorithmic reasoning.
Now, you'd assume orchestrating all these subcalls would be astronomically expensive, but the cost profile is one of the most surprising insights here.
It's so counterintuitive. While the tail-end costs for the really hard problems can be high, the median RLM run is often cheaper than a naive approach.
How's it possible?
Because the model learns to be smart about what it looks at. A standard summarization agent has to pay the cost to ingest the entire context. The RLM, using its code, can do smart filtering first.
Like using a reject search.
Exactly. It uses rejects or keyword searches to intelligently filter the massive input down to a small, relevant snippet before it commits to doing a full, expensive attention pass. On BrowseCon Plus, the RLM was up to 3 times cheaper than a summarization agent.
And it performed infinitely better. Efficiency from strategic context management.
And these emergent strategies are just fascinating. We see the model adopt complex behaviors without being explicitly trained for them. Things like probe and filter to narrow the search space, recursive decomposition to chunk by chapters or new lines, and maybe most importantly, stitching outputs.
Building the final answer programmatically from all the little subcall results.
That's it. Because the outputs are just variables in the REPL, the RLM can aggregate them into a long, coherent final response that far, far exceeds the token limit of the core LLM itself.
So, what does this all mean? It sounds like we've successfully broken the quadratic wall through this combination of architectural wins, algorithmic solutions, and now this new inference framework.
The bottleneck has shifted. It's no longer about how to fit raw data into memory. The real challenge, the defining skill of this next era, is moving from prompt engineering to context engineering.
Meaning you have to curate and optimize the information architecture you give to the model.
The quality of your output now depends on the quality of the informational scaffolding you provide, so the RLM can effectively query and decompose it. We're moving from brute force scaling to strategic smart access.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
RLMs are really the foundational step toward what you could call active memory. The ultimate future here involves explicitly training models not just to process text, but to reason as RLMs.
Architectures that can dynamically and intelligently decide moment to moment what to keep in fast memory, what to forget, and what to consolidate into long-term summaries.
Exactly. That ability to manage memory actively, rather than passively, will almost certainly define the next, and maybe much deeper, axis of scale for AI systems.